Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, greetings and otherwise hello. We're going to be looking today primarily at two lovely pieces of glass, one of which is the 35mm Zuiko f2.8 to f16 lens from Olympus, and we are comparing and contrasting that lens with this offering from Zeiss Jena. This is an East German lens. This is the rather famous and celebrated Zeiss Jena Flektogon f2.4 35mm. And as I've been comparing lenses, I thought to myself, why not compare the Zeiss and the Zuiko to this lens? This is the kit lens from my Sony A7. So I've set it to 35mm and I've done a couple of test shots with this lens. 35mm focal length is a very useful length. It's a little bit closer than 50mm. 50mm can sometimes be a bit constricting. You just get that sort of hemmed in feeling with it, and 35mm just opens up the frame a little bit. You don't get the same shallow depth of field effect, of course, with 35mm lenses compared to 50mm lenses, but that's not really what 35mm is about. In the same bundle of goodies that the Zuiko lens came in, I also got this interesting little piece of kit, which is an original Olympus close-up filter. This is, I don't know if it's got any particular grade of close-uppery on it. However, this is an Olympus close-up filter, and as luck would have it, it also fits on the Zeiss Jena lens. So I've been playing around with this on both lenses and doing a few comparison shots using this close-up lens also. So here are the lenses. We have on the right here the Zuiko lens. This has apertures running from f2.8 all the way up to f16. It's very small, front to back, 1.5 inches. That really is very small indeed. The depth of field scale is nearest to the camera body. Focusing range is pretty good on this lens. It goes from 0.3 of a metre, of course, right the way over to infinity, and to turn is 120 degrees, about a third of a rotation. So that's a pretty fast focusing mechanism. The lens does extend, of course, when focusing, and that adds a, half an inch or a centimetre or thereabouts. So a very compact lens, one that you can readily take with you anywhere. It's a good looking lens, it's a well made lens, it's all metal, there is no plastic as far as I can tell anywhere in its construction, so that's a very nice thing. This is the non-silver nose version, the slightly later version, which was said to have rather better optics than the early silver versions. Who knows? I don't know, I've not tested them side by side. And then in the opposite corner we have this wonderful lens. This is the Zeiss Jena Flektogon 35mm. This is a rather legendary lens. It's gained something of a cult status, and it is indeed a very nice lens. I've used this a lot for product photography mainly. The aperture range on this lens is a little more than the Olympus. This lens runs from, let's find the scale, from f2.4 right the way up to f22, so it does have that extra, not quite a stop, but a small portion of a stop. So when they're both fully wound in, you can see that there is quite a size difference between them. fully wound out, that is focused as close as it will go, it does become quite a bulky lens. Remember, this is only a 35mm lens, so on the scale of things it's a fairly bulky old beast. Here's the focusing ring, so let's focus right through the range. Now that's much further than the Zuiko, so we've got roughly 3/4 of a turn here from one end of the focus scale to the other. Minimum focusing distance, and this is where this lens really shines, is somewhat less than 20 centimeters. It's actually quoted as 19 centimeters. So you really can do some nice close-up work with this lens without any fancy equipment, without any extension tubes or add-on lenses. It's not a macro lens, but it really isn't far off. And if you use it on micro 4/3, that close focusing distance is effectively halved, so you're actually down to whatever half of 19 is, 9.5 centimeters when used on micro 4/3, and it does then begin to look like rather a macro-y kind of lens. It has very, very nice soft bokeh in the outer focus areas, as does the Olympus Zuiko lens. The Zuiko lens has the Olympus OM mount, which is a bayonet fitting, and the Zeiss Jena has the venerable M42 screw mount, which is a very versatile mount indeed. Both will adapt very easily to mirrorless cameras with a very cheap adapter. Here is the adapter that I use to mount the Zuiko lens on my Sony A7. It's a metal tube, it's a very cheap adapter. There's no autofocus involved in either of these lenses. And it has the Sony E-mount on the back here. This goes to the camera side, and here is the lens side with the Olympus OM mount there. So let's have a little look at what these lenses can actually do and how they stand up to each other, how they compare, and indeed whether there is an overall winner. So to begin with, we've got the Zeiss Jena lens at f2.4 with our three friends here, and we can see that it goes pretty close. It gives a pretty nice image. You can see that the image is sharp. This is quite a sharp lens, and that it also gives some very nice soft out of focus areas. The depth of field is fairly shallow. Action Man there is out of focus, and even the left hand side of the face of the doll is out of focus there. Looking at the Olympus at 2.8, well, it's quite a different story. You can see that the image is a little bit more red, and you can also see that the depth of field is less narrow. We've got everybody in focus there. Action Man's in focus, Doll's in focus, and in fact even the little wooden guy on the right is pretty much in focus. And we've also got some nice shallow depth of field effects going on in the background. I would say that's the more pleasing image of the two. It just looks nicer. It's a brighter, cleaner image. The colour balance is more pleasing. It's just nicer. Stopping down to f8 on the Zeiss gives what you might expect. The background is slightly more in focus, the image is slightly sharper, the depth of field is slightly less narrow. Doll's face has come into focus on the left hand side, the hair is focused, the right eye is focused. The artist's figure has now come into focus. However, Action Man is still a little soft. Looking at the Olympus version of that shot, well, all three figures are very sharp. The doll's face is very sharp, the hair is very sharp, Action Man clearly is in sharp focus, as is the artist's model there. As we would expect, the background is not quite so soft, though we've still got some fairly nice out of focus effects going on there. Of the two, again, I prefer the Olympus image at this aperture. The Jena image is nice, but it's just not as pleasing as the Olympus image. In some curious, undefinable way, it's still preferable. Here are the lenses at maximum aperture. We can see that the Zeiss is now sharpening up quite considerably. We've got all three figures in focus, and the background is now losing almost entirely the soft focus and shallow depth of field effect. Looking at the Olympus, we can see a similar thing is happening. All three figures are very sharp as they were at f8. The background looks to be softer than the Zeiss at minimum aperture. That's probably because the Olympus here is at f16 and the Zeiss is one stop further on at f22, which is a nicer image. It's got to be the Olympus, it's just nicer, it's sharper, the colour rendition's better, and to me it's just preferable right across the aperture range. If we take both lenses to their closest focusing distance and look at them across the aperture range, so here's the Olympus at f2.8. All of these images from the Zuiko here are taken using the close-up lens adapter. So this is actually beyond the minimum focus distance of this lens. And it gives a very nice image. It gets pretty close on the face of the doll. There's some nice bokeh going on in the background. Let's compare that to the Zeiss image, and this is where the Zeiss really scores. It absolutely blows the Olympus out of the water because it focuses down to 19 centimeters and gives us this kind of image. We've got writing on the face of the doll. The image is entirely sharp enough. The background is very soft at this distance. I think the Zeiss is the hands down winner here, simply because it can get that close to the subject. This is a very unusual lens, not many lenses can do it, and I think it just blows the Olympus out of the water just because of that minimum focusing distance. Staying close to the subject at f8, here's the Zeiss image. You can see the background bokeh, which at maximum aperture were bean-like shapes, are now becoming octagonal. That's pretty nice. I like a bit of octagonal bokeh. The image itself, of course, has got that bit sharper at f8, and if we look at the Olympus at f8, predictably the background's becoming less soft. The image is really nice, but it doesn't compare to the Zeiss because it just can't get as close. Here's the Zeiss at f22, and we're not surprised to see that the background is now becoming much more in focus and the image itself is sharpening up. This is not a particularly pleasing image. The best images I've found from this lens and where it really shines are at minimum focus distance, aperture from 2.4 to f8. Let's look at the Olympus lens at its minimum aperture, in this case at f16. We can see that that background is still relatively soft, a nice image, very clean, very clear, very sharp, nicer colour than the Zeiss, but not as close. Finally, we've got here the Zeiss Jena lens with the Olympus close-up lens fitted, and this takes us really to the next level. We're here probably about, I don't know, 10 or 12 centimetres from the subject. We're very close, the background is very, very soft. This lens, especially with the close-up filter fitted, now becomes a really versatile close-up lens and gives us a very, very pleasing image, very, very thin depth of field, lovely soft areas, lovely quality to the bokeh, just beautiful. That's where this lens really shines. Looking now at crops from infinity, so we'll begin with maximum aperture. Here's the Zeiss f2.4, and I think you'll agree that's fairly sharp. We can make out most of the writing on the board. The Olympus, however, is even sharper. That is a very sharp image indeed. That's quite something. Top marks to Olympus for this one. At f8, if we look here at the Jena lens, unfortunately I was losing the light at this point, so I had to whack up the ISO quite severely, so we've got a lot of noise. So that messes up the comparison to some extent, but I think we can see that in fact there is quite a degree of sharpness there. Let's compare now to the Olympus, and the Olympus at f8 again is very sharp indeed. Is it sharper than f2.8? I'm not entirely sure. There isn't much in it if it is. So the Jena at f22, unfortunately again we've got that issue with noise due to very high ISO. We can see however that the image is pretty sharp, as indeed is the Olympus. Finally, we'll compare the Sony image to the maximum aperture Jena and Zuiko images. We can see that the modern Sony lens gives us a very sharp image indeed. If we compare that to the Olympus shot, we can see that the Sony image is possibly slightly sharper, and I think it's fairly obviously a little sharper than the Jena image. So I think the Sony is the sharpest here, but not by a big margin. The Olympus is a very, very close second, if indeed it is a second, with the Jena trailing only very slightly in third place. So there we are, a couple of really nice lenses, both with strengths and weaknesses, both generally very, very nice lenses. Which is the winner? I don't know which is the winner. I suppose technically the Zuiko has to be the winner because it is sharper. It does have nicer colour rendition. Okay, it's only f2.8 as opposed to 2.4, but you don't really use the 35mm for the bokeh and out of focus effects. So the Zuiko is a very, very strong contender. The Jena, it has a couple of optical weaknesses. It's not quite as sharp. It does seem to suffer a little bit more from flaring and can't quite handle bright light sources as well. But despite all that, it has that fantastic close focus ability. Which do I prefer? On balance, I would say it's the Jena, just because of that close-up ability. Which one will I keep? Because I don't want to keep two 35mm lenses. I will probably keep the Jena. What can you expect to pay for one of these lenses? Well, Zeiss Jena has become a little bit of an iconic cult sort of lens. I would expect Current prices to be around what, 90 to 140 pounds for one of these. For the Zuiko, well, this is very, very nice lens. Current price is probably similar to the Flektogon, possibly a little lower, but they're around the same sort of figure. So thank you for watching as always, and I hope all xenographers and non-xenographers everywhere have a very happy new year. Thanks for watching. Like if you like the video, subscribe if you like the channel, which helps me to make more videos. Thanks very much. See you next time for more xenography.